Hey there, Dr. Christianson here with you. I want to talk about food allergy testing. So this is a topic that early on in my career I had two really conflicting experiences. One of which was that food allergies, food intolerances, they were a big deal and they could have a huge impact upon someone's health. The other experience I had was that I worked in a laboratory that did these tests and I saw that they were hard tests to do well, and the laboratory I was in, I was not confident about their quality control. So I knew that this was important but also dicey, and it made me want to really understand this and really get a good grasp on how to know accurately what someone was sensitive to and how to have a good bearing on that. The basic way the technology works in terms of blood tests is that you've got this big card, like almost like a bingo card, and there's dozens of different tiny little vials that contain food proteins. The person's blood is taken and the immune cells, the white cells, are taken from the blood and measured amounts are put in each vial. Now, if you are reactive to something, there's some kind of an immune response, some kind of an inflammatory response. If you've ever done in a science class like blood testing, blood type testing, what you'll do is you'll take blood and you'll mix that with different antigens for blood types. And I've got type A blood, for example, and if you were to mix B antigen with my blood, it would coagulate. You would see it form little clots, but you wouldn't see that with the A antigen, and you wouldn't see that with the O antigen. So too with food testing, if there's an attack, there's more clots. And they quantify that by shining a laser through the vial, and if the laser scatters evenly, there's no clots. But if there's areas where the laser light is blocked, there's more clots in that. And the more areas that are blocked, there's more clotting. And that was the technology back in the day, at least. So that was the basic setup. And to scrutinize that, something I've done a lot of over the years is I've tried to just do repeat assays. And that simply means checking the same person repeatedly, seeing if you get the same results. So that's one way we can know how valid a test is. The other way is just by clinical correlation, and that's seeing if those results are meaningful, if they actually help the person, if they cut out that reactive food and they do better or not, or if there's a food that the person does have problems with that doesn't appear to be reactive. So the two things we would do to evaluate tests are just how accurately they're reproducible and then how clinically meaningful they are. The second one is hard to gauge. It takes a lot of people and a lot of time to gauge that. The first one is very easy to gauge. The exact method I would use is doing the same person's blood, ideally in the same day, or send in a day afterwards with a different name on it. And the lab, not knowing that they were different people, would just run the tests and send in the results. And a good lab would get similar or identical, ideally identical results. My experience was that many did not, and many methods did not. So I want to talk through the various ways of gauging food intolerances and which ones are more or less accurate. Now, one very popular method is simple avoidance, and that's just cutting food out, seeing if you feel better. You know, many think of that as the gold standard, but the drawback is these reactions may take time to show up, and you may not know you're not feeling well until you've actually felt differently. So it's possible that a chronic symptom you've always had, you might think, oh, this food is not affecting me. Well, it is, but you've not felt the difference just yet. The other problem is that the time frame may be delayed, or also that the symptom is being caused by multiple foods. So maybe you cut out one food that's affecting you, but not the others, and you falsely concluded, oh, that food had no bearing on my symptom. Well, you weren't all the way there. So those are all reasons why the main goal of this is to improve our quality of experience, to improve our symptoms. However, the symptoms may not be the best gauges, the best GPSs, the best maps to move us towards that goal, if that makes sense. So that's the drawback about simple avoidance. The next common home method is elimination reintroduction. That's kind of like avoidance on steroids. That's basically making avoidance more complete and more refined and for a longer period of time. Common protocol with that might be doing foods that are very rarely allergens for a long block of time, and then adding foods in afterwards in a controlled fashion. Protocol might be rice and lamb. That's it for 10 days. And then afterwards add in one food per 3 days. Some might even take longer to add in a particular food. and then you could do a survey or a questionnaire to watch particular symptoms. This is certainly better than avoidance, and I would consider that a reasonable option. I wouldn't consider it a convenient option, and I wouldn't consider it a perfect option. You know, some of the reasons why are obvious. It's be a pain in the butt to limit your diet for that long. That's not convenient. The other drawback is, you know, how fast can you test 100 foods? That's going to be what? At per 3 days and the 10 days at first, we're up to about a year. And the 3 days may not be enough. It might be longer to see all those symptoms show up. So this can be an option for some of the higher priority food reactions from more obvious symptoms, so I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not perfect, it's not ideal. Other methods we hear a lot about, there's this thing called electroacupuncture vol, or electrodermal testing. And the basic process with this is that an operator has a computer. The computer will have a certain food that it's putting out a frequency for, and then that's connected to a probe, which an operator holds against, most commonly, some spots on the finger, but I've seen other parts of the body used. And the person holds the probe down, dials in that food, and it's or it's a high tone, it's a high line, or it's a low line. And what you're measuring is galvanic skin response. You know, you're measuring how readily your skin conducts current. And the theory from Dr. Vol was that the frequency of the food, if that changes the skin response, that's your body saying no like. It's saying, I don't want that, that's a bad food for me. That there's some energetic interaction that takes place there. And, you know, I'm a pragmatist. You know, if you give me proof, I will believe anything. So some of the theory behind it, they hit my BS detector in all honesty. I'm like, well, that doesn't quite fit what we know about physics in the world, but okay, I love the idea. If we had software, we had a simple device, and we could check hundreds of foods in a matter of moments, I like that. So let's play with that idea. I was lucky enough to be instructed by many who were top experts in the field. And my experience, and I used the machine after I was instructed, and my experience was that if I slightly varied my pressure, that might become a, I could change the score radically. And I said, hey, what's up with this? And they said, oh no, that's okay, you've not done this much. And over time, if you gain experience, you become really consistent with your pressure, and that's no longer an issue. I'm like, okay, I could swing with that, because there are many things that require skill and time to do well. I'm like, okay. So I had one of them, they would graciously offer to test me for my reactions. I'm like, sure, love to see how this plays out. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm curious about what they're saying, but also I've got a sense about my reactions. I'm curious about how well this corresponds with my experience. And they did, and I'm like, okay, now there's this whole operator issue thing. So maybe this wasn't ethical, I don't know, tell me if I was wrong, but I had a couple of the other operators also test me, the other practitioners also test me. I didn't really mention that someone did and what they already got. I said, hey, would you mind testing me and seeing what my scores are? So 3 separate times I was tested on the same machine within a matter of hours by different, all highly skilled practitioners. And I thought, hey, if this stuff is at least reproducible, they should all get similar results on me. They did not. There was actually no relationship at all. They were all completely different. So that left me no longer feeling okay about it. And I went on to read, there was actually a lot of papers done on this process, the science, and the larger studies really saw the same thing that my experience did. There were no consistent findings. They would vary quite a bit. And with this method, many that do it are tested all the time, and the whole story is that your reactions change on a day-to-day basis, so you've got to test often. Like, well, no, they can evolve, but they shouldn't change that fast. It's just not meaningful. Now, I'm sure there have been many circumstances in which people have been told to do things they should have done anyway. Like maybe they're told, you've got a problem with wheat or sugar or dairy, and someone cut those out and they felt better. That's awesome, but we wouldn't so much ascribe that to the technology. The other big thing that's kind of similar is called applied kinesiology, or AK, or muscle testing. Now there's different versions of AK and muscle testing. Some versions of it are used to check the strength of muscles to see, like a physiotherapist, a physiatrist, a physical therapist would say, hey, is this muscle too strong relative to this one? Or is this muscle in spasm? That's a valid version of that. The other version I'm talking about is more so for diagnostic purposes, not related to muscles. So that the theory is that if you have something in your body's proximity that is not a good fit for you, it will weaken a muscle response. So the practitioner will have you hold a vial, or they may even have a thought of a substance. I've heard of that being done, but most commonly you'll hold something that is a representation or a physical simulacrum of what it is that you're trying to test. Like you've got a little vial of dairy, for example, and you're holding that, and the practitioner is then testing your muscle. He's pushing down on your arm. And if you've got a neutral response, so you've got a vial of water, we all need water, you're strong enough. But if you're holding, say, a toxin or a poison, oh, your muscle will be much weaker. And the same amount of force would push your muscle down further. And that's been used to say if various foods are good for you or not. Now, I was taught about this as well by a very advanced practitioner of this discipline. And I was skeptical again, and so I proposed an experiment. At the time, there was himself, who was well regarded as being a skilled person in AK, and there was many other people who also did AK as a tool. And we had a medicinary nearby as I was being taught this, and there was all these various empty vials. And I said, okay, cool, so let's get some vials. We had some students who were sick a few weeks ago from a cleaning compound that was used, and it was hexane. It's nasty stuff. It's called goof off or spot out, and it's just horrible, horrible toxic solvent. And I said, let's put that in one vial. I'm going to do my best to make sure there's no odor so it's not obvious. Let's put that in one vial, and let's put just purified water in a dozen other vials and give them all random numbers. And you can test people if they're strong or weak. And if this is real, when they come to that hexane, ooh, that should make anyone weak. It's horribly toxic for everyone, no debate about that, and we all need water. So I thought if we've got one hexane amongst a dozen waters, and none of us know what they are until afterwards, then it should show up. So we took hundreds of data points, literally. This person tested many people with all these vials, and then others tested many people with all the vials. And we just wrote down, okay, strong, weak, 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 strong, strong, whatever, at the number of the vial and at the person. And when it was all said and done, then those who had the codes of which number was which vial, they showed us the codes, and we correlated the codes with the results. And it was actually worse than random chance. If you randomly were to select which was good, which was bad, you'd have done better than the AK would have done. And also, studies have been done on this, and similar results have been taken. So like with the EAV, if someone is saying something that's probably helpful, that's fine. If they're saying you should have more spinach, you should, not eat preservatives, cool. But not so much because of that science. Next up, there's pulse testing that's been done. And the idea with this is you just measure someone's pulse, like before and after a meal with a particular food, and ideally just one food. The rationale is reasonable. Many of the reactions that can take place with foods can affect histamine, cytokines, and therefore affect pulse rate. So I see how that could definitely happen. And I wouldn't doubt that if someone had a peanut allergy, as an extreme example, and they ate peanuts along with many other changes, their pulse would probably go up. So I think there's like a valid idea, but a drawback is that in many cases, when you're aware of eating a food, just being concerned about being reactive, that itself could also raise your pulse. Just saying, ooh, I'm feeling off, your pulse can go up from that. So some shortcomings to it, maybe potential, but not one I'd rely quite as heavily along. Now we've got skin tests. So this is where you're taking some food protein and you're injecting a little tiny bit right below the skin. And you're watching to see how red, how swollen, how nasty it gets. Now, the skin has IgE, like the lungs do and like the gut has. However, the gut has other immunoglobulins the skin does not have. So skin reactions, if they show up, that's valid. If you take peanut and you put that below your skin, that gets big and red and nasty, you've probably got some peanut sensitivity. On the other hand, if you put dairy protein below your skin and nothing happens, that does not rule out all dairy sensitivities. So they're valid for their positive data, but they're not valid for their negative data because the gut can react in a greater number of ways than the skin can react. The skin is a better, albeit not perfect, but a better predictor of lung reactions than it is of gut reactions. Other issue is that it's just harder to check as many compounds with it. So that's the skin. Now the blood tests, that's where we're taking the blood out, the immune cells, seeing how they react. So we have the IgE, IgG thing. So blood tests can be done for just the immediate obvious reactions. Now in those cases, they're relatively accurate, but they're not very helpful. You know, if someone has immediate severe reactions to a food, they pretty much figure that out. They tend to be aware of that. It's not something that's mysterious. So the IgG are more helpful. But this is where it gets really murky. Because these reactions are more delayed and hard to pinpoint, they're hard to do well in terms of technology. And this is the one to where I've seen so many examples of labs to where I've sent in my blood plus more of my blood with some random name on there a day or so apart, and me and this other person have totally different results. I've seen this probably the vast majority of the times, 97 or more % of the times. So that's the pitfall. I'm not financially tied to any labs, but in the report, in the blog post, I've mentioned a few labs that I do like. There's the food inflammation test, there's US Biotech, there's Meridian Valley. I think they've all got some role to play. There are ones in which, at bare minimum, I've seen that on a blinded divided sample, the results are consistent. So that's one bar they do pass. So who should do these tests? How should you test them? Well, I would argue that anyone should check. You know, definitely if you've got some disease you're struggling with. Honestly, apart from that, if you just want to be healthier, you want to have better metabolism, better energy, less aches and pains, you want to feel better, it's worth knowing which foods are going to jive well in your body and which ones are not. If you're taking in foods that tie up your resources, you won't do as well. No way around that. What should you check for? The better panels look at about 100 of the most common foods. That's pretty good. If someone does see a really high % of reactive foods, it may be worth looking at a more exotic panel that might check 100 additional less common foods. And the main reason for that is because, well, you've got to cut a lot of these things out. So it's better to know for sure what your options are. Most don't need that second panel because the reactive foods are low enough in number, if any, that they've got a lot of things they can do instead. So most do fine with about checking roughly 100 foods. But if there's a lot, you may check a few more. Also, I would screen for celiac on an annual basis. So that's one to where the blood tests are not perfect in that they often show people being non-reactive who truly are reactive. And it may not show up until you've checked a certain number of times. And it can also change over time. So each year, check for foods, check for celiac. You know, smart things to look at. How often should you check? You know, annually is a good baseline. But if you're reactive to a lot of things, make that your project. Make that your top of your to-do list is to heal up your intestinal tract. So really cut those foods out, heal things up. I've given other talks about that and other blogs about that, but heal things up and then recheck. Maybe you're going to go 3 months out or as late as 6 months out. When you're dialed in, you've got a few foods to work around, check it each year and stay on top of that. One of the biggest things to keep your body functioning well is to get the right foods and the right amounts. So that's it. Eat well, take great care. We'll talk in really soon. Bye-bye.